Schuyler Bailar,
The first transgender male.
The first openly transgender athlete.
the first ever transgender person to play on an NCAA men's team.
Testosterone is one of the only arguments about why trans women shouldn't compete in women's sports. Could you maybe present the key arguments why you disagree with them?
There is available research that supports that testosterone suppression does produce meaningful competition between cis and trans women. Michael Phelps produces half the levels of lactic acid. He's got twice the lung capacity of the average person. But when people talk about that, what do they say? Wow. If those differences exist in the women's category, it is immediately considered unfair.
If I were to decide tomorrow that I was a 47-year-old woman, should I be allowed to go shower in a women's locker room?
There's been no actual effect on sexual assault statistics across the states when this was kind of implemented.
It is playing on real fears that I think are valid. We do need to protect women and girls.
How optimistic are you, Schuyler, and what do you think the next steps are now? For our listeners, Schuyler, could you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, yeah. Well, as you all have said, my name is Schuyler. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the first openly D1 men's trans athlete in the NCAA. And if anybody, I don't know how many of your listeners are in the US or in the UK, but the NCAA is the largest governing body for college sports. D1 is the highest level. And so much of my platform these days has been built off of that initial foray into being a public figure. When I started in college in 2015, I didn't know really any other trans athletes. And so I decided to talk about my experience and gave hundreds of media interview pieces. I gave 102 speeches before I graduated from college. And I sort of built this platform, I guess, from the platform that I was given as a transgender educator and advocate, and then now author. So I've worked for the past 10 years or so on what I would consider gender and trans liberation more generally, not just about sports. Those sports are a guiding light in many ways, and also the original light. Yeah, I host a bunch of workshops, support groups for trans and queer folks. I do life coaching sessions for mostly trans and queer folks and their parents. I do a bunch of consulting as well. And my primary work is doing public speaking, trainings, workshops for companies, businesses, and schools, again, to advance gender and trans liberation.
You said you did 102 speeches whilst you were at Harvard before you even graduated. So yep. Obviously, you would have developed a long time, a lot as a communicator over that time. How's your approach changed? And kind of what do you open with now? And what have you learned through just doing it so much?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think many people are surprised to hear this, but my approach, especially at the beginning part, has not actually changed really at all. I give a very similar speech, at least the first 15 minutes, now than I did at the beginning. I've thrown in some new speeches, I've worked for, sometimes I do a new speech, but mostly I'm giving a very similar speech to the first year of speeches. And the reason is that telling a story, I think, is the best way for people to get involved in, a fight or a conversation or a concept that they're not familiar with, is to say, this is a person. And so I always start with telling a bit about my story. And I actually the first picture I put up on the board is a picture of me when I was 10 months old. So me as a baby, because I feel like everybody can immediately relate to a baby to some extent, right? And they're not going to be like, we hate that child or we hate trans people because they're looking at this baby. They're just looking at a cute baby. You know what I mean? So a lot of it hasn't changed. What has changed over the years is that when I started this work, most people had not even heard of the word transgender, or if they had, there was no really strong idea of what being trans meant. They were kind of like, is it changing something, gender? I don't know. There was a lot of just not understanding, ignorance, right, about trans people. Now, transgender is a word that lots of people know. Do they know it correctly? Not so much, but a lot of people think they know a lot about trans people. We're a huge topic in the media, which I'm sure both of you know, and I'm sure we're going to talk about. But this has created a massive amount of disinformation, propaganda, lies, like straight up just not facts at all, that people are armed with before I even step into the room. And so the work, that's why I said the beginning hasn't changed, but what comes after has shifted, because I've had to figure out how to have people unlearn the things that are false about us first, before I can then teach them what is correct about us and about gender liberation more expansively.
Yeah, that must be really tough, because the way I see it, at least, is that it's like two sides of a coin. In one sense, it's better that there's more discussion around it, but in the other side, it's like people are getting like, I don't know, in some way it's becoming such a contested topic that people are getting almost more heated about it. So it's like two sides. But that kind of leads into my question, which is kind of, nowadays, what do you find to be the biggest challenges around being an advocate in 2024?
I think the biggest challenge is what I just named, which is that there's so much misinformation out there, and just so much information, right? We are in a society where there is an overflow and just complete ease of access to a massive amount of information. And when I say information, I'm not using it scientifically in that it's correct, right? I mean, information is anything we can find, whether that be on TikTok, on Instagram, on BuzzFeed, Pinterest, I don't know, wherever people are finding the news, and even the news, which is supposed to be, by journalists who know what they're talking about, frequently publish incorrect things about trans people. Or there was a recent statistic that was like I think it was like 30-something%, or maybe it's even higher, of New York Times articles that have talked about trans people do not quote a single trans person. So people are also talking about these issues and about us as trans people, but not talking to us, right? So we have, again, a massive amount of overload of information. And then most people, in my understanding or opinion, are not actually armed or equipped to accurately, adequately digest that information, to filter it, to critically examine what is real, what is fake, what needs more evidence, what is a bold claim but isn't actually proven. And in this overloaded information world, I think what's difficult with trans people is the loudest voices are not the ones that are necessarily right, but they're the ones with the most power, which really means the ones with the most money. And when we break that down, the voices that we're listening to, which means the information we're digesting that's the loudest, is often not right. Not only morally speaking, but I'm talking about factually. Like, there has been many people that were yelling about trans athletes, for example, claiming that, let's just use the most, talked about issue. For example, that Leah Thomas beat all of her competitors in all of her events and dominated all these records. Leah didn't break a single national record. She didn't break an Olympic record. She didn't even compete in the Olympics, right? But all of these completely false, easily provable things were being stated about her and her performance that are just wrong. But so many people believe them. I can't tell you how many people who tell me that they are allies have come up to me and said, but didn't Leah blank? And I'll be like, no, here's the clear proof. Here is the little stopwatch, right, from that meet. So yeah, that's the hardest part, is the amount of rampant information that is often not based in truth, research, or science that people are starting with, as opposed to starting with a blank slate.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I just wanted to drop you in a word from our sponsor, Manscaped. You can use the discount code LOAF to get your discount, because even a lion needs to tame its mane.
Get the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra from Manscaped now. Stay fresh with no cuts, so that your baguette leaves no crumbs.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that short clip with Schuyler Bailar. If you want to check out the full episode, click right here. Since you got to the end, I'm assuming you liked the video, so please leave a like. It really helps the channel. And subscribe, because we've got loads more like that coming very soon.